All right, everybody. It is Monday, 10 a.m. I'm Matt Lewis. He's Charlie Sykes. And Charlie, I'm psyched to see you today, man. How you doing?
It's 9 a.m. here in the frozen tundra of the Midwest, flyover country. Still 9 a.m.
I- It may be colder and we may have more snow. We don't need to get into that. But
Yeah.
you know where things are really heating up? Down in Texas, Charlie. Did you see this election? And I think we should probably start here because we have starting probably last November when we saw those gubernatorial elections in New Jersey and Virginia. We started to get a sense like things have shifted. Maybe a wave is coming, and then we would see some special elections here or there. But you're like,
Yeah.
maybe this is an anomaly. With starting this Texas thing feels a little different. But what do you make of it?
No, actually, I spent a lot of time looking at this because I tend to be somewhat skeptical about these off-year elections, and of course, all politics is local. What do you not know about this? Or there are other factors, but this is a state senate district, and the Republicans were not caught napping. They knew they had an issue. They spent a ton of money, dramatically overspent the Democrats. Donald Trump personally intervened in this, so this was on the Republican radar screen. And this is a seat that should not have even been, maybe it should have been a little bit close, but it was 17-point Trump district plus 17. So the Democrats not only win, but correct me if I'm wrong on my math here, they won by 14 points. The Democrat won by 14 points. That is a 31-point swing while being outspent something like 7-1. This is the kind of dynamic that the polls don't actually pick up on, do they?
And not only that, some of these special elections are in like tiny districts.
Yeah.
This is bigger than a U.S. congressional district. Um, and you're right. Trump did intervene. He posted 3 times about this race in recent days, trying to juice election day turnout. And so it's Tarrant County, generally thought to be a major bellwether county, not
Sure.
just in Texas, but nationally. So the thing that interests me, Charlie, and this is where things could get fun. You know what I mean? Like fun. Texas Republicans. Remember, we went through this whole thing about redistricting, and they were trying to steal these
Games on games.
districts.
Yeah.
But the premise when they redrew the districts, the premise they were operating under was based on Donald Trump's 2024 performance in these largely Hispanic districts. So it very well could be not only does this mean that Democrats have the wind at their back, but it could be that Republicans have screwed themselves with this redistricting, that they will actually lose more seats than they gain as a result of trying to game the process.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that are clearly going on here. I mean, number one, the Trump numbers in 2024 have been cratering since that. What a surprise when you unleash ICE on every brown person in America, where if you're of Hispanic origin, whether you're a citizen or not, you know that if you leave the house, there's a chance you might get hassled, you might get arrested. You have to bring your papers. If you yourself are not hassled or arrested, in America, I think everyone knows someone within 3 or 4 points of separation who has been in fact harassed. So you have the cratering of those numbers. The other thing is happening, and we've seen this again and again. Democrats are supercharged to come out and vote. Again, I'd have to look at the numbers more carefully whether or not there was a Republican turnout. But in terms of motivation in an off-year election, right now the Democrats have a tremendous advantage. Otherwise, nothing remotely like this would have happened. So this has got to be setting off alarm bells. Obviously, you're talking about things happening in Texas. There's certainly the possibility that that Texas Senate seat might be in play. Now, I'm a big skeptic about that if the Democrats nominate Jasmine Crockett, but the Republicans, they have a primary, and if it ends up being Ken Paxton, one of the most deplorable, unethical guys faced, criminal charges, just a total extremist. If he's the attorney general, if he wins that nomination, all bets are off, and then you're really looking at a change in the national complexion. Donald Trump does not want to lose the House, but he really doesn't want to lose the Senate. By the way, can I just comment on the scariest article of the weekend that we don't have a
Please.
chance to end the internet? David French has laid out the scenario for which Trump and MAGA could try to mess with the election without actually affecting the count. Intimidating voters, using troops, using ICE agents to dissuade voters of color from being near the voting booths. And as I was reading this story, I mean, this is one of those things that would have, sounded like Trump derangement syndrome a year ago. As I'm reading David's story, which I strongly recommend, there was not a single one of the things he warned about that did not seem plausible to me. That Trump would try this, that he would flood these blue cities, have people around voting booths, would ignore federal court orders. So I do think that it's naive for people not to pay attention to what this administration will do, especially if they feel that their backs are up against the wall because of elections like this. If they think, holy crap, these guys are going to take power and our little window of unaccountability is about to end. What are they capable of doing? I think that's what we have to ask each other over and over again. What are they capable of doing? And we know, but also, and who's going to stop them from doing it, which is also an interesting question. But these things all ought to be top of radar for people.
Look, and I think it's wise to overestimate your opponents as opposed to underestimating them. And
Yes.
so I put nothing past Trump. I will say this though, Charlie, I'd be much more concerned about Republicans um, not having elections or Republicans refusing to seat elected
That's
Democrats,
possible too.
because the thing that you've just described, that David French has described, I believe, now who knows if it's intimidation can work, but I suspect that it would backfire. It seems to me that if Donald Trump attempted something that heavy-handed, that it would likely backfire and inspire more. What's happening in Minneapolis, we could see repeated,
Yeah. Well,
and at the ballot booths.
I agree, but is there anything about this particular crew, this particular gang, that thinks they might not engage in some sort of extreme step that might backfire, considering they're doing it? And by the way, so much for the de-escalation of Minneapolis over the weekend. Trump puts out another bleat or whatever you want to call it, saying that they're going to be deploying ICE agents in Democratic cities to protect federal buildings. And did you see the language that he used? And you're authorized to use whatever force you want. That if somebody, spits at you, you're able to, give it back to them even more so. Like, what rules of engagement is he specifically talking about other than I am still totally behind you, no matter how cruel or brutal you are?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw SNL this week, but they did a pretty good job parodying the ice and Homan
What?
and all of that. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. But look, Charlie, I think this is a theme that we've been talking about since we started doing this every week. Is that Donald Trump he obviously, almost every president overreads their mandate. Trump clearly has done that. Even though those people had the mass deportation signs, they didn't actually think it was going to be like this, most of them. But the other problem is that Donald Trump, in the first term, not only does he have pretty interesting, good political instincts in a weird Machiavellian sort of way, but he was doing these rallies. So he was getting this feedback from the crowd. He had a better sense of what was popular in middle America, I would say. Now he is surrounded by weirdos and ideologues and billionaires. And so someone like Stephen Miller, who doesn't care about popularity, he's not the Svengali you call if you want to win over an average American. He is somebody you call if you want to implement a radical, weird, fascist agenda. And that is what they are doing. And it is not popular. And it's not going to be popular.
No, it's not. I want to work up to the weekend's good news story, but so Donald Trump, yeah, hasn't ventured outside that bubble. You see, this weekend though, he went to the alfalfa dinner, and this very high level roast, and apparently totally bombed. I mean, he failed to slay with his comedy. The room was silent, and I wonder whether he was surprised by that at all, or whether he cared. I don't actually know. Or maybe he had spent so much time within this bubble that you were describing that he didn't realize how lot of this stuff is just landing like a complete thud here. And by the way, we just I don't want it to be the main story of the day, but it felt a little bit almost too much on the nose. The whole, everything Trump touches dies. How about the fact that in the middle of the weekend, Trump announces that after all, the Kennedy Center is going to be shut down for 2 years, no entertainment whatsoever. So the guy puts his name on it. He wants to be the impresario of the world. And what does he do? Because he's humiliated all the actors and artists and performers who are refusing to go to the Kennedy Center. And he knows that, he's sitting down with Rick Renell and saying, so next 3 years, we're going to have one cancellation after another, one cancellation after another, empty venue, empty seats. So what does he decide to do? This pathetic man child shuts it down. And again, it's almost too much on the nose in terms of the symbolism. But
I'm gonna go back to Texas real quick, Charlie,
yeah,
and
yeah,
something you were talking about the Senate, right? I think that conventional wisdom for a long time had been obviously that the Democrats have a really good chance of taking back the House, but not the Senate. That the Senate it's too steep a hill because you got to go into places like Ohio
yeah.
and Texas and like Iowa and Maine and Alaska. And these are road, if you're a Democrat, these are road games. And I mean, it's starting to seem like, if Democrats are overperforming by 14 points, then all of a sudden Sherrod Brown probably does win in Ohio, right? And so
Well, I
I
don't.
think
Yeah, Ohio's
it,
still going to
it's
be a hard
it's
bet.
still going to be a slog, but I think it is much more within the realm of possibility. And
Oh,
that to me is
absolutely.
a much bigger deal because then having the House would be nice, but when you have the Senate, there could
And
be 2 Supreme Court justices that are
and you
stopped.
can imagine who they're going to be. Well, and look, I mean, you have a couple of pretty clear pickup possibilities. North Carolina, Tom Tillis is retiring. Numbers look really bad for the Republicans there. Maine, so you have two right there. Leaving aside, a Hail Mary like Texas, which we ought to be still a little bit skeptical of. Uh, outlier, possible Alaska. I'm thinking of the big wave elections where people go down that you just do not think are going to go down. And I remember being a young reporter back in 1980, covering in Wisconsin the Senate race. The legendary former governor of Wisconsin, Gaylord Nelson, was a United States senator who was not unpopular at all. Founder of Earth Day. I think it won 6 years earlier by like 63% of the vote. I remember being at a rally at the Bavarian Inn thinking how weird it would be if a guy like Gaylord Nelson were to lose to Bob Caston. I know this was like inside baseball, but nobody really thought that would happen. And of course, the 1980 Republican wave was so great that it did sweep him out, and it was stunning. I mean, it was. So this is what happens is that you have the leaners flip, but then also there's often that one extra like, wow, nobody saw that happening, and maybe it would be Sherrod Brown in Ohio. I mean, that would be genuinely shocking given the way that state has that is. But everything's possible now. I mean,
Yeah,
especially when you're watching what's happening in Texas. If we're not missing something really fundamental, if Democrats do not manage to screw something up royally, um, you could be looking at. I saw one guy was texting back and forth on a chain. We could be in the category of looking at maybe 45 seats in the House. I mean that's not a high tide. That is in fact. But again, let's keep our irrational exuberance in check. A long way to go.
yeah,
Many roads to go. But anybody think that Donald Trump is going to get better? That Donald Trump is going to make a pivot that's fundamentally going to change the conversation in this country? And what would it be? Um,
yeah. He's
I,
getting
I,
he's getting older. He's getting more chaotic. Uh, there's there's no reason to believe that he will suddenly change. Charlie, 2 quick points. Number one, if you're watching us and you enjoyed this walk down memory lane, I want to highly recommend. I listened to you on Andrew Sullivan's podcast
yeah.
recently, and it was great. You got to talk. You talked a lot about your childhood, your
More important one, yeah.
parents, how you got into this whole. It was really enjoyable to listen to. And if you're a Charlie Sykes fan and you want to be a completist and learn the origin story,
Too
the
much
Andrew
information.
Sullivan interview.
Yeah.
Um, the other
Y-
point I
y-
wanted to make is I don't know if you saw this. David Plouffe, the Obama campaign manager, had a piece in the New York Times a couple weeks ago where he was, and I don't think this was like bedwetting, but he was saying, let's sounding the alarm. Like, hey, Democrats, things look good right now, but there's a bunch of structural problems up
Yeah.
ahead. The map is bad. We're going to lose some of these seats if the Supreme Court, overturns the Voting Rights Act, yada yada yada, right? And he had a valid point, and I think it's better to be cautious and prudent. But the thing that Pluff kind of missed, I think, is he's looking at the map as static, as if the current electoral map, the blues and the reds, the so-called blue wall, all that stuff is
Yeah.
static. And I think things are going to be reordered. I think things are changing. And in fact, Texas, you may not be able to just pencil in Texas as red in 10 years. And so, yes, it's good for Democrats to be cautious. But I also think there's a danger of sort of believing that the world is going to end and you could never win again.
You know, I hope people can hold both those thoughts in their head at the same time. Yes, the Democrats do have some structural problems. They do have some issues they're going to have to deal with after the midterms. On the other hand, you are absolutely right. Don't assume that what's happening now is not causing a significant shift because these images, just think about the last week or so, the way in which the images out of Minneapolis, I think, have changed the conversation in a really, dynamic, dramatic way. And I figured it was word I wanted to use there. I actually had a piece last week wondering whether or not this was the one thing that was causing the normies to begin to break. I
Yeah.
actually posted an email I got from a military family in Augusta, Georgia, who had taken down the American flag because they were so horrified by the images. Um, this is a real possibility. Anyone who was like drawing a line about how young voters are going to go toward Trump, how Hispanic voters are going to go toward Trump, how African American men are going to go for Trump. Um, I would, I would keep your powder dry on some of that. So
Well,
you're
let me
right.
just give you some examples. I mean,
Yeah.
so one of the groups that Donald Trump picked up in 2024 were these sort of young podcast bro men comedian
Mhm.
types, right?
Right.
One of them is this guy, Andrew Schultz. And he had this to say recently: ICE murdered an American citizen in cold blood, and then the Trump administration called him a domestic terrorist. That's it. Like, plain and simple. I see the administration trying to spin it, and it's effing disgusting. Then we saw, remember the Bundys, Emon Bundy?
Yes. Damn it. Yes.
So, Ammon Bundy was the most famous right wing militant in America not long ago after he led two armed standoffs against federal agents at his family's Nevada ranch and Oregon bird sanctuary. But his outspoken criticism of President Trump has made him an outcast in his community. And then you have Rand Paul, who's
Wow.
suddenly sounding heroic. He says, quote, I saw a man that was retreating. And he's been very critical of Trump. He was talking there about Alex Preddy, but he was
He
on
has been
60,
really solid. Yeah.
60
He's
Minutes.
been.
And so, we could expect someone like Bad Bunny or to criticize Trump. We might expect, the Don Lemon's arrest. That has sparked some concern from journalists, obviously, or
Should be.
concern
Yeah.
about the First Amendment. But what to me the interesting thing are these comedians, these right wing militia types, and these libertarian types like Rand Paul, because that shows it's not the usual suspects who are turning against
Very
Trump. It's
much
part of
not.
his coalition.
No, and I think that some people on the left probably haven't picked up on the split over the Second Amendment that's coming out of this. I don't want to spend a lot of time on all this, but the Second Amendment zealots are real zealots. They are really true believers, and they've been fighting for years for the right for concealed carry and open carry. And I have had real differences with them. But this is something that is really hardwired into a lot of these folks. And when the Trump administration and Kash Patel just turned on them, it's like no, if you're carrying a legal concealed carry weapon to a protest, we have the government basically has the right to kill you. It's like, wait, you know, if only we had been warned that these people were utterly without principle. If you're a Second Amendment person who has been arguing for years that the importance of the Second Amendment is to be able to defend yourself against a tyrannical government, these are times of real cognitive dissonance now, aren't they, when you think about it? So this is a problem. Can we talk about those since we're on the Minneapolis thing? One of the good news stories, which I am fascinated by, and I'm writing about it in my newsletter today. This little 5-year-old boy, Liam Ramos. Okay, everybody remembers that story. He was the 5-year-old little boy with a little blue cap who was
Super
used
cute.
as bait. Yes, super cute. Used as bait by ICE to arrest his dad or something. I mean, the pictures, the story, it looked like it was ripped from a dystopian novel. It really captured, people's attention, and their sense of decency. ICE takes that kid, sends him down to a detention facility in Texas where he actually gets sick. Okay, here's the good news.
Mm.
Last week, an amazing federal judge order tells ICE, you got to release this kid, send him back. Over the weekend, they fly him back. He's home. Did you see the images? He's in the cockpit of the plane. The pilots are presenting him with the flying wings. This little boy sitting there. I mean, this has captured the imagination of the nation. This has kind of broken through. But the reason I really wanted to bring it up was you have to read the actual opinion by this judge, where he just eviscerates ICE and puts it in this larger historical constitutional sense that is actually kind of breathtaking. J. Michael Ludig has been writing about the Declaration of Independence and the values that underlie the country. This is a judge that I think has been listening to Judge Ludig very, very carefully. But in my newsletter today, I'm going to post the entire decision by this judge, which is just like burning with righteous anger about the incompetence and just the vileness of ICE. And this is one of those stories that I think, to your point, is causing the electorate to move and changing things. The judge's opinion was fire, somebody just wrote. It absolutely is fire.
Well, one thing, Charlie, and it's unfortunate that this is true, but you don't get heroes without villains. And uh, acts of kindness and generosity and heroism are really only necessitated during times of tragedy and trauma. And it
Highlight. Yeah.
could be a small act of kindness, like giving a little kid one of those pins on an airplane and letting him up in the
Great.
cockpit, or it could be something bigger. I'm trying to write something on this right now, and it's just not coming together quite yet. But you'll remember this, Charlie. The pro-life movement, which is very different from the right. The right has myths and heroes, right? And they tend to be like Italian fascists and stuff like that. But the pro-life movement looked to people like William Wilberforce, who was the British parliamentarian who led the fight against the British slave trade, and they looked to abolitionists. And um, mm, some people may think that was misguided or a flawed analogy, but at least they held up truly heroic people as kind of their model. And they're like, the abolitionists were protecting the vulnerable. We're protecting the vulnerable.
Yes.
And I think that what's happening in Minneapolis right now, and I'm not the first person to say this, but I've seen people like Adam Serwer and
Mhm.
people like Ta-Nehisi Coates who are comparing these protesters. A lot of them are white. Two of them who were killed were white. These protesters in Minneapolis with the whistles who were out there putting their bodies in harm's way
Yeah.
to the abolitionist cause. And, um, I don't want to overstate things. Maybe it's not quite to that level,
Yeah.
but this is an opportunity for heroism. And again, there's not a lot of upsides to what we're facing right now, but one upside is that it is during moments of
Again,
crisis when
fine.
you can see people rise to the occasion, Charlie.
Okay, so just briefly on all of that, William Wilberforce. That's, or by the way, the movie I just rewatched it in the last couple of
Is it Amazing Grace?
The Amazing Grace. It's an
Yeah.
excellent movie. Strongly recommended. Um, remember the role of the faith communities of the churches, both in the abolitionist movement and in the civil rights movement. And this is one of the things that I think has been absent in the resistance to Donald Trump, especially with the evangelical, you know, pivot or surrender to MAGAism. And I've talked to you about this before. It is really interesting to me to watch the way in which the new pope, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, has been really aggressively pushing back how leaders of the church are much, much more outspoken in a way that we have not seen in years. So, yeah, these crises, will highlight the villains, but it also gives rise to the people who are making the moral choices. Because we always ask, what would we have done back then? Would we have hidden Jews? Would we have participated in the Underground Railroad? If it came right down to it,
Yeah.
would we have marched across the bridge in Selma? Well, up in Minneapolis, those people are answering that question, right? They say, yes, this is our moment and we are going to do this. And the church is remembering this is what it means to be pro-life. And I find their critique to be very, very powerful when the Pope himself says, it's not enough just to be anti-abortion to be pro-life. There's a lot more involved there. So this is an interesting
Yeah.
conversation, and we don't know the way it's going to play out. So have you gotten through all the millions of files in the Epstein files yet, by the way?
Well, real quick, Charlie, before we go there, I just wanted to put a bow on that and say, because one of the commenters made a point that I think is relevant to the abolitionist thing, which is there is the other analogy of sort of like the Fugitive Slave Act, right? Where you had
Yeah.
people um, going into the North and trying to, in other words, going into a
Yeah.
sanctuary and trying to bring back. And then then they would enlist Northerners and like, you have to help us you have to cooperate with us or else we're going to put you in jail. We're going to fine you. And so I don't want to make too much of this analogy, but I want to make enough of it. I think there's something there, and I'm trying to write about it and go, pray for me.
No, good luck.
Right.
No,
All right.
I think it's a very, very important point. And this is the one thing that, it's sort of easy to become despairing and like this is the end of the world as we know it and everything. But in these crises, I think that there is a certain moral clarification and a moral clarity and things that we've taken for granted or that we, had question marks about, where we would come down. I think they're being answered. And this will have generational impact. I mean, the people who are being motivated to do this. And the other one more point, um, the fact that the vast majority of these efforts have been nonviolent is obviously incredibly important and incredibly impressive, and I think is providing a moral exemplar for the rest of the world. And by the way, the rest of the world is watching everything that's going on here. I mean, if you are sitting in Norway or you're sitting in Romania or you're sitting anywhere, you are watching what's happening in the United States of America. Trust me. So, I mean, this is a moment where America is going to define itself one way or another in the eyes of the world for a very, very long time.
So Epstein. I mean, let's just say there is like a through line here, right? I mean, what's happening in Texas with the election results, as you noted, is partly a result of what the ICE story backfiring and hurting Trump and Republicans. But the Epstein thing kind of kicked it off. The Epstein story, like last summer, was really and the refusal of Trump to release these files. I think really that's when you started to see fellow Republicans really turn on Trump. The Nancy Maces, who's back in the news, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, and the Thomas Masseys, who has remained vigilant on this. But man, this thing. I mean, Elon Musk wanting to
Yeah.
go to this party. Bill Gates apparently getting some sort of venereal disease,
Oh, and
allegedly.
Lutnick. Yeah.
Richard Branson's involved, yeah, Nutlick, the Giants owner, the New York Giants football owner. There's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of people. And then this part, the New York Times reports that the Justice Department published dozens of unredacted nude images on its website
Oh,
showing young women or possibly teenagers whose photos were contained in the files related to the wealthy sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. What in the hell is going on?
incompetent. A lot of incompetence. And I actually am. sort of waiting for people to sift through all this significance because, when you're talking about a dump of millions of documents, there's so much. So just a couple of quick points. I mean, some of these allegations against Donald Trump, unconfirmed, unverified, are absolutely horrific. Now, the big question is, even if MAGA supporters believe that he actually was involved in, raping young girls, forcing them to perform oral sex, would that make a difference to them? I am skeptical. But the one thing that is also interesting is the number of names that are in these files. This entire universe of powerful, rich, or wannabe, celebrity men who turn out to be sexual predators. What a shock, right? Um, but here's the Trump effect. How many of them will lose their jobs? How many of them will become social pariahs? How many of them will see their careers come to an end as the result of these allegations? 5 minutes ago, metaphorically, if a prominent business executive was caught up in this sort of thing, that would be it for them. They would be, they would be, they would be, they would be shunned, right, by polite society.
Yeah,
It's
the
part of
board of directors would force the
yeah,
CEO to step down and whatever. I mean, it would be
will any
untenable.
of them? Right. But now, in the environment that Trump has created, if you hold any of these other men accountable in some fundamental way, then you have to hold Donald Trump. And if we're unwilling to hold Donald Trump directly accountable, then basically he has succeeded in moving this window of acceptable behavior so that we will have all of these rich and powerful and influential men who have been tied to sex trafficking, sexual predators, who knows what else. And they will pay no significant price whatsoever. That is the Trump effect. And it's something that we need to be aware of. What do you make of all of the stuff in the Epstein files about the Russian involvement,
Oh,
the
right.
possible, the suggestion, and again, unverified, let's be all careful about all this. Some of it's uncorroborated, but it's certainly suggestive that Jeffrey Epstein might have been working with Vladimir Putin and maybe other intelligence services to get compromise on people. It kind of feels that if you're in that mindset, that dots are connecting, things are clicking together about the Russian involvement and Vladimir Putin's either attempt to get influence or favors or to blackmail various people in the West. How far are you willing to go on that? Because I mean, Drudge reports all over like this,
Right.
shocking headlines show, and that the ties between Epstein and Russia are real, but are we going to go down a rabbit hole, or is this basically kind of the Rosetta Stone for all the shit we've been going through?
I don't know the answer, but let me read this is from the Daily Mail, link
Yeah,
to
the Daily
from the
Mail.
Drudge Report. Huge 80-point font siren Drudge Report. Says Epstein files suggest the pedophile arranged multiple meetings with Putin, while intelligence sources believed he was running the world's largest honey trap operation on behalf of the KGB. The release of more than 3 million files relating to Epstein give credence to incendiary claims made by senior security officials that Epstein was working on behalf of Moscow and possibly Israel when he facilitated assignations for some of the world's most powerful men. One intelligence source branded his actions, quote, the world's largest honey trap operation on behalf of the KGB. So,
Honey traps were a thing, right? I mean, this has been a thing for hundreds of years. Would the KGB have engaged in these kinds of things? Yeah, because they work. These guys prove to be, I think, a lot easier targets, easier marks than maybe we would have suspected, or maybe not. But yeah, I'm gonna put this in the category of unproven but very intriguing.
and it raises
Very.
the question of like, there are questions like, how did Epstein get all the money he got? Like,
Oh,
you
tons of
know, how did it start? How did this guy end up getting the network he had and the money? It's interesting. And then the other thing, Charlie, and this is not an original point. We've been kind of making this point for a long time, but there was a sense during, like, remember the QAnon thing? There was a sense that like there was this huge cabal of rich elites who were engaged in this hedonistic, decadent behavior involving child sex rings and all of this stuff. And you look at the names of the people that are, implicated to a certain degree. I mean, they knew at this point, they knew who Epstein was. They knew that he had been arrested, convicted, or whatever of this sort of thing. And they're still hanging out with him. They're asking him for advice on dates. They're trying to come to his wild parties. These are the richest, most powerful men in the world. And so, yeah, maybe those conspiracy theorists had a point. But what blows me away is that they elected the guy who's friends with them all.
But this was
And
known beforehand. I mean, this was even before the election. People would say, wait, if you're really, really concerned about the Epstein cabal, look at this guy. There are pictures, there are videos, there are interviews that he's given. Oof, yeah. It's,
as someone
it is.
said,
Yeah.
there are more pictures of Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump than I have with my grandmother. Like,
Oh,
for sure.
I actually think that's true. Well, I think that, again, you step back. I mean, there's so many of these questions. Where did the money come from? How would Epstein have created this network? Because honestly, you look at some of the names and it's kind of like this who's who of everyone in the world, right? Um, yeah, and your Bill Gates. What does a schlemiel like Jeffrey Epstein have to offer Bill Gates? What does he have to offer these masters of the universe? And the answer is that at a certain point, that let's say that you are a billionaire and so you have all the airplanes, you have all the houses, you have all the big screen TVs. What is the one currency that you most want? And Jeffrey Epstein understood that the one currency was women, young
No,
women.
but let
And
me
he
stop
trapped
you
them.
there, Charlie.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're a billionaire, you can get all the women you want. But what you may not be able to get are underage women to rape.
Ooh.
Because I'm telling you what,
Okay.
you do
All
not
right.
need,
Okay. All right.
number
You're right.
one, you don't even need $1 billion to pick up chicks necessarily. Number two, if you're a billionaire, I'm pretty sure there are plenty of decent, attractive, nice ladies who would love to hang out with you. So
Yeah,
why
but
do
he
you?
needs someone to make it happen. You're Bill Gates. Where are you gonna? I mean, how are you gonna do it? Then you get Jeffrey Epstein on the phone saying, "Hey, would you like to fly down to my island?" I don't know. Yeah, but this is, but this story. Okay, let's just underline the fact that there was a lot of concern that this story was going to go away. It is definitely not going away. Now, again, the way they're releasing them, the way they're redacting Trump's name, the way they're throwing out so much stuff, I can understand how the victims are very, very frustrated about all of this. That they're not seeing any path know to get any justice. But this story is not going away. Um, I just don't know how MAGA is going to. Again, yes, I do. I know how MAGA is going to process this. They're either going to choose not to believe it, or they'll fall back into whataboutism. That I could read you the most salacious allegation about Donald Trump, and what our buddies in the anti-Trump world will say. Well, what about Bill Clinton? I don't give, a flying fuck about Bill Clinton. In all of this, he's not running for president. He will never be president. I will never vote for him for president.
Yeah, we
Donald
didn't
Trump,
like
a
him
man who
back
is
then. We were
they,
you
but
and
Don,
I were against Bill Clinton always. Like go ahead, put him in jail if he's
yeah,
guilty. What do I
yeah.
care?
I was never that I mean, but everything feels like it's all been supercharged. But yeah, it's the the fact that and it's not just Donald Trump. It's what he's doing to the entire culture of the country. In terms of all of this. But I actually was slightly surprised by one thing, Matt, this weekend. Just one slight surprise over the weekend. I figured that with the massive document dump of the Epstein file on Friday night, that there was at least a 50-50 chance we'd be bombing Iran this weekend. Didn't happen. Maybe it'll
Yeah,
happen today because
good.
that dog needs to be wagged at some point, right?
Good.
What does Donald Trump do if it's going along if there's a news cycle that he really, really hates, he has this, infinite confidence in his ability to change it. And the fact is, he's got the aircraft carriers there. So I was actually, thinking Sunday morning, we're going to wake up and find out that Iran's been bombed. And Matt Lewis and I are going to spend the entire time talking about what are we doing in Iran as opposed to what's in those Epstein files. So at least we got one extra day to talk about the Epstein files and what happened in Texas and the Kennedy Center.
Last thing,
And
last kind of big idea I want to bring up, and then maybe we call it a day, Charlie, is I think that, you know, in American politics, you want to be cool and you don't want to be the man. You don't want to be the establishment, right?
Mhm.
And um, for reasons that are bizarre, Donald Trump, despite being a billionaire, despite being the president of the United States, for years was able to cast himself as sort of the outsider, scrappy outsider fighting against the man, the establishment. And I think that's turned. I think it's turned with ICE and the streets. Now it's the resistance, we're Leonardo DiCaprio, baby. Uh, you know, um, and I think it's happening, the contrast between these, ICE agents wearing their masks and their vests and all that versus the people in the streets. And I think the Epstein files thing, right? I mean, you've got these rich billionaire friends of Trump who are implicated in this to some degree or another, depending on who they are. Um, he is becoming it's becoming very hard to pretend that he is the outsider and not the man.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I never really thought of him. Yes, I think you're right. And I don't think that's going to get any better. I don't think you can get the cool back. Um, Especially because he goes down these rabbit holes of obsession. One of our listeners said, "Will you guys talk about the arch?" You know, so I mean, so Donald Trump, I keep thinking like, what can you do to pivot to change this? And the reality of Donald Trump is that his top priority is building himself a $400 million golden ballroom. Okay, not exactly the populist message. And then what does he do? He doubles down on that and he says, "We're going to build this great, arc to Trump, that will overshadow all the monuments." And it was reported over the weekend that he wants it to be 250 feet tall. Now, for those of you who've seen the original in Paris, I think that's what 160 feet or something. And I asked my wife, I said, guess why he wants it to be 250 feet tall? Why 250 feet tall? Because that's so out of scale and disproportionate. And you have to actually dumb your mind down to a certain point. Do you know why he wants it to be 250 feet tall?
It probably because it's bigger than fill in the blank monument.
Okay, now that I think is a good sound argument, but the dumb actual reason is because he's thinking it's for the 250th birthday party of America, 250 for 250.
Yep.
This is the way his brain
Yep.
works. It's like he comes up with because it matches. It's like these weird things like how many days of training do we give the new ICE agents? 47 days of training. Why
Mm.
47 days of why not 60 days of training? Because he's
The 47th
president.
president, right?
It's that bullshit. Like, what the hell? Oh, yeah. Do you think that arch will ever get built? I have no idea.
I think it gets built, and I hope we tear it down January 21st, 2028. So,
I do have fantasies of that. I can actually, in my mind's eye, see it coming down. As like one of those pictures of at Nuremberg, the big eagles coming down. Okay, so I went there. Yeah.
all right, my friend, we covered a lot of ground. What a good show! What a good conversation. And thank you everyone for watching and following us on Substack and all that good stuff. Charlie, any final thoughts, my friend?
No, I'm going to be very intrigued to see what kind of a deal Democrats think they can strike with the White House to dial back ICE. I mean, I think this tightrope walk where we're not going to shut the government down. We're going to fund ICE for another 2 weeks, but then we're going to come up with negotiations that will make ICE do things like stop killing people in the streets, actually obey the law, all of those things. It'd be very interesting to see how they pull that, whether they pull that off, and whether if they don't pull it off, they are willing to shut down the government. Because I think right now Democrats do hold the whip hand. And I think that it is politically untenable and morally untenable for them to continue to fund ICE if it continues to behave this way. This is not business as usual. And this is where I think we're going to find out whether Chuck Schumer is, as I suspected for some time, definitively not the right man for the right time.
All right. We're gonna have lots to talk about next week. So check us out. Join us again next Monday. And Charlie, always a pleasure. Thanks, man.
See you next week.
See you then.